Hello, everybody. We are starting on our last section of anthropology. It's biological anthropology. It is not my strongest suit, so the stuff here is going to be pretty standard. Um, Let me see. So today, this week, also we're only doing evolution because of the holiday. And the next week, last two lectures, and that's pretty much it. You guys are done. Let's do some quick housekeeping announcements. Nothing due this week. There will be reflection due next week. The final will be due on the 12th, and the extra credit assignment, which I've already posted there, will be due on the 13th. Please make sure to read the assignment before you do it. If you are, I don't have time to like really give you partial credit or whatever. If you follow the directions, you're gonna get 100%, which is 5 extra credit points to your whole grade, which is a lot. And if you don't do it well, you're gonna get a 0. That's it. So please, keep the BS to a minimum. Make sure you do the reading. Make sure you do the reflection. Make sure it's the right word count. Okay. Again, I emphasize, please read the instructions. The instructions are different from a normal reflection, so just read the instructions. Okay. And also, obviously, for that one, there's no late papers because once that day is over, I gotta submit grades. So make sure you get that stuff in. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. All right. So real quickly, the final exam. I should have posted this next week, but it's the same thing. Final exam will include all topics of anthropology. For this exam, there's going to be 25 points, which is 25% of your grade. There'll be 40 multiple choice questions, which means each question is going to be worth a quarter of a point, and there'll be 5 short answer questions, and each of these questions worth 3 points. You'll be asking yourself, why are they worth 3 points? It's because those are the most important parts of our class. And on top of that, you might be wondering, how am I going to give you the same amount of time but have like, twice as many multiple choice questions? The reason is because the midterm is literally copy and pasted onto the final, right? So if you get your answers all cleared up on the midterm, then on the final it should be no problem. So you should already have, out of 45 questions, you should have 22 that are already like just good and set. That being said, you have to, get the answers for your midterm. Like, you have to get the answers for your midterm. If you have problems looking at your midterm, then let me know. But again, I've been asking you guys to look at your midterm already. Again, if you have issues with those questions, you need to ask me and let me know. Okay. All right. So what are some so in this lecture we're gonna be going over Darwin. I know most of you probably have already heard of him, but we're just gonna go over some basic stuff about him. And I want you throughout this lecture to think about how is Darwin's perspective of or of how new species coming about, of how animals change, how is it different from people that used to think about the same topic? Okay. So real quickly, we're going to talk about how people understood the living world before the 1800s, basically before Darwin. We were going to understand evolution as a process of change over time. We're going to talk about how Charles Darwin developed his theory of evolution, consider how others have elaborated on Darwin's work since publication of The Origin of Species, and demonstrate why evolutionary theory is central to how we understand biological processes today. So, what is evolutionary theory? Evolutionary theory notes that living species reflect changes over time and space. It considers how existing organisms can give rise to new kinds of species, and explains that all species ultimately share a common ancestry. Okay, we see material evidence for evolutionary change across time and space in biological variation, genetics, and the fossil record. Okay, I'm surprised. I thought this was yeah, okay. So we're gonna talk more in depth about this a little later, but basically, like, how do we know what are some key differences or what makes evolutionary theory so different from other types of theories about how animals change and stuff, right? The first thing is like it talks about changes in animals over time, right? So if you compare a dog today versus a dog like 5,000 years ago, they're going to be different. They're going to be different in terms of the physicality and stuff, but they will still be the same species. Evolution theory talks about how new species can come about. Okay, this is very specific, and also explains that we all come from a common ancestor. Okay, again, we're going to go into more in depth in this later. And the evidence for this is when you look at biological variation, again, such as a dog today versus a dog like 5,000 years ago or 100 years ago, it's different, right? If you look at a dog that is native to United States versus a dog that is native to Brazil, it's going to be different, okay? Genetics, the study of genetics, that's pretty obvious. And of course, the fossil record. When we compare fossils from species that exist today, they're literally different, right? And it's through the fossil record that we can see that despite being the same species, they have some differences. Sorry, give me a second. Give myself a little drink right here. All right, cool. So evolutionary theory is tough, TUF, okay? Testable, unified, and fruitful. A set of independent hypotheses support, verify one another, right? Meaning that you can kind of repeat the same experiment or theory or whatever, and it stays true in different, different, not just for one case, but for multiple cases. Unified explains a wide range of material evidence. It will explain a lot of the questions we have about the same thing, right? So we're talking about evolution, like how did cats, or how did, like, I don't know, how did like the feline ancestor become cats and tigers, right? That would also answer how did like the dog ancestor become wolf and dogs, right? These are this theory is like can prove multiple things, not just one thing. And finally, fruitful would suggest new possibilities for future research that explains biological diversity, right? Pretty straightforward. Okay, evolution theory is tough. Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace explained the pattern of distribution of living species of organisms, such as various species of finches living in the Galapagos Islands, by arguing that all the variants had evolved from a single ancestral species. Now, I have this picture here because I feel like it's a really good example, or really good, like, it paints a very good story, right, of how they came up with the theory, right? The first thing I want you to notice is that, these birds are quite similar. All of them look very similar. But as you can tell with certain ones, like the large ground finch and the tree finch, those two finches, even though they are similar, they still have some pretty significant differences. And I like to think that it is this kind of image that made Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace be like, you know what? They're not the same, but they have to have something in common. And that kind of is the inspiration for evolutionary theory, at least from Darwin's perspective. Okay. So again, all these finches, they look very similar, but there are some key differences. They have to be different, but there also has to be some kind of similarity amongst them. What are those differences? What are the similarities? Where they come from? That's kind of what inspired Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. All right. So let's talk about some views of nature before Darwin. Okay, this is what people were thinking before Darwin became popular. It's pretty good. The sparkling ice cherry limeade. It's fire. Okay. Anyways, so essentialism. Living creatures exhibit an unchanging nature and essence. This notion traces back to the Greek philosopher Plato. Each kind of organism is sharply distinct from all other kinds, right? So this is from Plato. This is like from Greece back in the day, right? But what this is saying is basically that each animal has its own specific essence, like its own thing that's very clearly different from other animals, right? And so when you compare things like a tiger and an alligator, yes, they are very different. However, this obviously becomes a little bit complicated when you start comparing other things, such as the finches, right? If you see the finches, right, are they the same? Are they different? Like, is there something that is essentially different from one finch to another? Not really, right? But they do have differences. Okay, so this obviously was wrong, but this was kind of like the perspective from Plato. Okay, there's also the great chain of being theory, which living creatures are created by God and overlap with other closely related kinds of creatures. Creatures are ordered by degree of sacredness in an unbroken chain leading to the divine. This encompasses all logically conceivable organisms. This arises out of the ideas by Greek philosopher Aristotle. So this one is talking about how basically animals are ranked, right, by how close they are to God. And of course, I believe in Aristotle's thing, humans are like the closest to God, and like bugs are like the furthest to God. And they're created with that in mind. That's how they're created. That's how they go extinct and everything. Okay, this is from Aristotle. Catastrophism. Species become extinct because of natural disasters, and new species abruptly appear to replace those who became extinct. This was developed by Georges Cuvier. This is more recent than the Aristotle and Plato. But basically, what this one's talking about is like, hey, there's natural disasters that happen, and it kind of wipes out a bunch of animals, and then new ones come back, right? This is an interesting perspective, but this is obviously wrong. I think that maybe maybe Georges was looking at how animals can go extinct all at once, but in reality, at least as we know today, when animals go extinct, it's not like a immediate process. It takes it takes many factors and over many years for things to go extinct, right? So not usually, and actually, it's very rarely, very rarely. Extinction very rarely happens with any kind of catastrophe. It's usually small thing. It's usually like environmental things, like like if you're an animal that lives in the forest and the forest is no longer because there was like a fire or something, right? That would be a good example of how a catastrophe could make an animal go extinct. But even then, a lot of them exit the forest and live somewhere else. But it's I'm trying to think of like something that, oh, like if you're a freaking certain type of fish and your river dries up, it's like, yeah, you're gonna die. But like, is it gonna be fast? No, it's not really a catastrophe. It's something that happens slowly over time. Okay. So last one, or second last one. Uniformitarianism. Same natural process that affect the world today worked in the past. Uniformity of these processes allowed the Earth's history to be constructed. This was supported by Charles Lyell's Book of Principles of Geology. So this one's a little confusing, but what I think is happening, I mean, in this one is basically that the Earth is repeating itself every like whatever, like a million years or something, and because animals do not know that process, it will, or sorry, because animals are part of that process, animals will pop up and disappear depending on how the Earth changes. This one's a little odd, so don't worry about it. Now, last one. This one's actually important. So, transformational evolution, developed by Jean-Baptiste de Monnet de Lamarck, also known as Lamarckian evolution. Individual living organisms were seen as transforming directly in response to the changing environments. Individual transformations or acquired characteristics were then passed down to offspring. So, while these past four were pretty clearly wrong, actually this one is taking some it's this one and Darwinian evolution actually are seriously considered theories, right? We're going to talk about this more in the last lecture in bioanthropology, but basically what this one is saying is that evolution, the change in animals, happens through the environment, right? And in some ways this is visible, some ways it's not, right? So like it's if you start living in more, I don't know, like foresty kind of wooded environments, then you will develop certain types of attributes to deal with the forest, right? Like maybe you have longer arms, or maybe you can develop claws to climb trees or whatever, right? So for now, this is, whether it's true or not is a, let's leave it as a question mark because we will be coming back to this. All right, so we just spent some time talking about Darwin. We just spent some time talking about pre-Darwin perspective. Now let's talk about Darwin himself. Darwin and Alfred. I always emphasize Alfred Russel Wallace because he doesn't get a lot of love. Darwin always gets a lot of love, but Alfred Russel Wallace was actually just as important, if not more important, in certain areas in developing evolution. But anyways, variational evolution emphasizes the importance of differences and not just similarities within a species. Theory of common origin. All similar living species have a common origin. And finally, theory of evolution by natural selection based on the principles of variation, heredity, and natural selection. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, so variational evolution. The importance of differences and not just similarities in the species. This is very important, okay? And this can all go back to our picture that we were talking about earlier, right? When we're looking at all these finches, we're looking at all these birds, right? Yes, you could emphasize the similarities, but Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace really tried their best to emphasize the differences. So, for example, I assume the warbler finch was in the upper left corner, and the large ground finch on the floor, right? Like, I think the warbler finch eats different things. The large ground finch eats seeds, as it says on the thing. But instead of emphasizing, oh, hey, their beak is similar, oh, hey, their fin is similar, when you emphasize the differences, that's when you can tell whether something is the same or not, right? Theory of common origin. All similar living species have a common origin. And again, if you go back to that picture of the finches, it is so obvious that they have to have something in common, right? They have to have some kind of like something in common, and that's kind of like where this comes from, right? Is that like, like our cats and or sorry, our pumas and jaguars and whatever cheetahs and leopards are they different? Yes, absolutely, but they are similar enough where they have to have a common or they have to have something in common. And Darwin and Alfred were just going like, okay, they must come from the same place or same ancestor. Theory of evolution by natural selection. The way that species change and new species come about is through natural selection. Okay, so think of the first two as kind of like, the first one is kind of like, look, we look at the differences, not just similarities, or it's important to emphasize the differences, not the similarities. The second one is, there's a lot of similar animals. They are distinctly different, but they have to come from somewhere that's the same, which is the common origin. And finally, how does this happen? It's through this thing that we've made called natural selection, or that we've termed as natural selection. We'll talk about it later. Okay. What is natural selection? This was developed independently by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Both observed that species varied over time and space. Both concluded that similar but distinct species descended from a shared ancestral species. So at this point, right, they both agree on animals being different in time, like basically like now versus 500 years ago, and space and that basically depends on where you're living or where the animal's living. Okay, that's very straightforward. They both also concluded that the similar distinct species descended from a shared ancestral species, which again, they come from a similar ancestor, right? Like the finches, they all come from like some OG like ancestor finch. Okay, so those two, that's what they agreed on. However, Darwin proposed natural selection or descent modification as a mechanism for evolution. So Darwin was actually the one that came up with natural selection specifically. All right. Natural selection operates on existing variation within a population. Individuals with traits that are best suited to a particular environment more likely to survive and procreate. Individuals with the most progeny have superior fitness, and finally, progeny inherit the traits that make their parents fit. So this all sounds kind of obvious because we've been learning about Charles. Like if you took any science class, like they talk about natural selection. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a deeper cut. So existing variation, right? This is important, meaning that your species, even when it changes, can only change as much as is allowed in their biology, right? It's not like, I don't know, like I don't think fish can grow legs, right? Or like that even after a lot of evolution, I don't think they can do that because that's not within their variation, their biological variation. That's number one. Now, number two, right? Individuals with traits that are best suited to a particular environment are more likely to survive and procreate. This is very important. Sorry. Yeah. So basically, what that is yes, are your things that you have, the characteristics, the biological characteristics you have, does it fit the environment that you live in, right? For example, having sharp teeth might be great if you're in an area where you need to hunt things, but having sharp teeth in a place where there's mostly vegetation might not be the best thing, right? So you guys are all pretty clear about that. However, what's the goal? What makes an animal more naturally fit is not just being able to survive, but also being able to procreate, which means basically have babies, right? So the one thing I like to tell everybody is like when we're talking about this third line right here, individuals with the most progeny, the most kids, descendants, whatever you want to call them, have superior fitness, right? So who is more fit? Someone, like a tiger, or some dude on the couch eating potato chips with two kids? It's dude on the couch, right? Because the dude on the couch has two kids. He has more offspring. Okay. Now, so when we're talking about really naturally fit animals, right? I want to give you a great example, which everyone in New York City is familiar with, is cockroaches, right? Cockroaches are very naturally fit. When they have babies, they have so many successful babies that they can like they when you kill them, they just don't go down in numbers. You have to kill them like at a large scale, right? So and cockroaches can have babies, in all kinds of difficult like environments, right? And not to mention the survival part of it. Cockroaches are so elusive and so difficult to kill, basically, that we have whole industries geared towards killing them, and we still haven't wiped them out or anything. So when we talk about things with the most progeny, right, with the most descendants, those are the most superior. Those animals are the ones that have superior fitness. Okay. But now let's also talk about something else, right? Because when we talk about, it's not just who has the most kids, it's also talking about who has the most successful descendants, right? So, for example, cats and dogs, they have babies. I would say that humans are more, what's it called? More naturally fit than dogs and cats, even though dogs and cats have more babies, right? And the reason for that is because humans will have more successful babies. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to bring down the class, but if you guys have ever seen cats, especially, or dogs, like when they have babies, a lot of them don't make it, right? But with humans, a lot of our babies make it, right? So even though we're talking about numbers wise, cats and dogs would be higher than humans. When we're talking about them becoming successful, as in like living and stuff like that, it's usually humans. Okay. And the last thing is progeny, the kids or the descendants, inherit the traits that made their parents fit. Okay, so keep that in mind. We're talking about naturally fit. We're not only talking about your ability to survive in an environment, but we're also talking about what's your ability to have offspring. That is what makes something very naturally fit. Or sorry, some animal very naturally fit. All right. Traits shaped by natural selection for the function they currently perform are adaptations. Traits that were shaped by natural selection for one function but used for another are exaptations. Any useful trait, regardless of origin, is an adaptation. Exaptations and adaptations may be challenging to distinguish. So this is a little bit confusing, but basically adaptations are things that animals are using to survive better, right? Or to become more naturally fit, right? So, but what is an exaptation? An exaptation is, let's go back to that picture, this panda thumb, right? So the panda thumb is used to eat bamboo, okay, by pandas. Great. Now, if the panda thumb was used or was originally meant for pandas to climb trees better, but they ended up using them to eat bamboo, that is considered an exaptation. Okay, so basically, if it's used for something other than what it was intended for, it's an exaptation. But that being said, as long as it's useful, it's considered an adaptation. So that's why it's a little bit confusing. Okay. Now, exaptation and adaptations are very challenging to distinguish, right? And the example here is bird feathers, because the feathers on a bird, we do not know whether those were created for flying, and it helps them fly, of course, or were they created for warmth, and then they use them for flying. So it's hard to tell which one's which. Okay. How did biologists learn about genes? Darwin knew something was passed on from parent to offspring. Pangenesis was a theory of heredity favored by Darwin and others. Each parent generated multiple particles reflecting your unique traits. These particles blend in different ways in each offspring. So Darwin was like, okay, something gets passed on to the babies when they have kids. So what is that? And he thought of pangenesis, right, where the particles or the genes or whatever from both parents come together and they mix and they create the baby. But this is, as we know now, not true, right? Because when you have someone with blue eyes and black eyes, the eyes of the kid does not come out a combination of blue and black, right? It comes out blue or black, right? So that's very different. The person that was responsible for discovering this was Mendel, okay? And Mendelian inheritance views heredity as based on non-blending single particle genetic inheritance. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. So Gregor Mendel was an Austrian monk who lived from 22 to 84. He bred peas, right, like the plant peas, to kind of like do this research. So he noticed, though, when he was blending peas, that he would have, I think it was like yellow and green, or the white and green, doesn't matter. main point is when they would blend, right? When they basically had offspring, the offspring wouldn't come out as a light green or anything. It would come out as either green or either white, right? One or the other, right? And so Mendel's repeat experience showed that traits passed on to a child can be dominant or recessive. Dominant traits are expressed in an organism, meaning that you can see them, they're visible, and recessive traits are not expressed, even though they don't, you can't see them, they're still in their DNA. So basically, with Gregor Mendel's example, right? Let's say a green and a white pea have offspring, and that offspring is still a green pea. Great. That green pea has another offspring with another green pea. Their baby, or sorry, I shouldn't say baby, their offspring could still be white because as a recessive trait, that original green sorry the green bee the green pea that had the baby with another green pea still has the white traits in their DNA despite not being able to see them. Okay, so that's why that was actually very insightful. So again, I'm trying to think of an easier example. Let's say I have brown eyes and my partner has blue eyes, right? We have a baby and that baby has brown eyes. Great. That baby has another baby with someone else that also has brown eyes. Their baby can still have blue eyes. Does that make sense? Because the trait is still within them. It's just recessive, meaning you can't see it. Okay. So, let's see. What are the basic contemporary genetics? Scientific study about heredity emerged almost 35 years after Mendel's work in the early 1900s. So Mendel got like no respect, even though he was like really on top of his stuff. He had some pretty cutting edge stuff, but no one really cared at the time. But yeah, genes are the biological unit of heredity, represent a portion of the DNA molecule. Alleles represent all different forms a gene might take, located on chromosomes that occur in sets of paired bodies and cell nuclei. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So some key terms in genetics: DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, carries the genetic heritage of an organism. The genome is the sum of all genetic information about an organism and is carried on the chromosomes. And finally, mutations represent the creation of a new allele for a gene. You don't need to know these. I just want you to hear them and kind of like generally understand them, but you don't really need to get yourself get to know them. Key terms in genetics: homozygous represents a fertilized egg that receives the same allele for a specific trait from each parent. So homozygous would be like, again, brown. I had brown eyes, my partner had brown eyes, and our baby is receiving the brown eye allele from each parent, right? So it's gonna have brown eyes. Heterozygous would be a fertilized egg that receives different alleles for a specific trait from each parent. I have brown eyes. Oh, let's say my partner still has brown eyes, but her I don't know, someone in her ancestry has like blue eyes. The baby might be receiving the allele for brown eyes from me and from blue eyes or whatever from my partner's like grandpa or something like that. Okay. Mitosis refers to the way body cells replicate themselves, right? Mitosis is like when you cut your hand, the hand, the skin and stuff like grows back to the way it was. Meiosis, however, is the way that sex cells replicate themselves, which is making a baby. They come together, split in half, and then you make a baby. That's why they're always different, right? As opposed to mitosis, where they're always the same. Okay. Great. Mutation. The creation of a new allele for a gene when the portion of the DNA molecule to which it corresponds to something altered, such as lactose. If you guys don't know this, lactose is a mutation that occurs that helps you digest milk. That's why people who grow up drinking milk, specifically cow's milk, will not be lactose intolerant. People who grow up without drinking milk, they do not develop the enzyme and the mutation to digest milk. Okay. Genetic mutation is random, but may produce traits that make an organism better adapted and likely produce more offspring. So mutations are really dependent on the animal situation. Sometimes mutations are good, when I say good, I mean it helps them live longer and reproduce, but sometimes they're bad. So it really just depends on what situation the animal is living in. Yeah, it's not that important. Okay. What do they mean? Okay, evolution theory has been repeatedly tested since Darwin. Contemporary biologists recognize that evolution is a complex phenomenon that requires theoretical pluralism. Theoretical pluralism recognizes that a variety of processes operate at different levels to create similar differences. So, what this slide is basically saying is, yes, even though at this point we believe Charles Darwin is the one, it's like the way that we, believe evolution occurred. we need to keep an open mind, because just because we think it's that way, as we become more and more familiar with how things develop and don't develop, the theories might change. So it's very important to keep an open mind. That's all. All right, good. Full circle. Next week. Oh wait, where's the freaking thing? Where's the question? Oh, I don't have a question here. Okay. Anyways, what are some of the key points of Darwin's perspective? How is it different from some other perspectives? The main thing I want you to really pay attention to is right here, right? Variational evolution, theory of common origin, theory of evolution by natural selection. These three things are what makes Darwin's perspective of evolution so different from what it was before. The fact that he paid attention to the differences between animals, even though they were similar, the difference between animals, right? But also paying attention to similarities in the sense that they must have a common ancestor. And finally, how does the change in species come about? How do new species come about? It's through natural selection, right? Those three things are the most important differences for Charles Darwin / Alfred Russel Wallace's understanding of evolution. All right, now coming back to the announcements again. Next week, Friday, the last reflection 5 is due. Yeah. Is there anything else? The final exam will be due on the 12th of June. Oh, and then the extra credit will be due on the 13th. Okay. If you have any questions, as always, just shoot me an email. I'll be giving you guys' quiz grade soon, but you guys can calculate. You just add up the points basically, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you hit 15, you got full credit. Okay, but I'll put them up soon. Other than that, you have any questions, just shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kvcc.cuny.edu.